Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen and Fed Chair Jerome Powell both spoke before the House Financial Services Committee yesterday, and they're going to speak before the Senate Banking Committee today. The message they have is that the economy is recovering, but there is a long way to go. They also point out that the new stimulus package is going to help, but it's not going to make all of America's problems go away. The Fed's going to have to remain accommodative. The Treasury has even more ambitious plans that it has in the works. It's a guarded message, and so it's no surprise that markets were unimpressed. Let's start with the labor market. This is clearly where Yellen and Powell are most concerned. I went back to the Bureau of Labor Statistics non-farm payroll numbers for February that came out at the start of the month. And what they show, and what both Yellen and Powell mentioned, is that the unemployment rate in February was about 6.2%. That means roughly 10 million Americans are unemployed. 4.1 million of those count as long-term unemployed, and roughly 2.2 million are on temporary layoffs. Now, that temporary layoff number is down more than 500,000 from the start of the year and significantly below the 18 million who lost their jobs at the start of the pandemic. What's worth noting, however, is that 6.1 million are being forced to work part-time, 3.5 million have lost their jobs permanently, and another 1.9 million have dropped out of the labor force altogether. More important, perhaps, the number of state and local government workers joining the unemployment ranks is rising, particularly in the educational sector, even as jobs are being created in the leisure and hospitality industries. If 2009 and 2010 are any guide on this, we're looking for a slow recovery, not a fast one, at least in terms of employment, even with the very generous stimulus package that's been approved. Most important in all of this is the fact that labor force participation in the US is now down to 61.4%. That's very low. Of course, that number has been low since about 2014, which is the worst that was experienced following the last crisis. And if you look at the shakeout from the last crisis, what you see is a relentless decline in the labor force participation rates from about 66% in 2008 to just under 63% 6 years later. That number has been creeping up since 2014. That was the good news. All of those gains have been erased as the number fell off a cliff, and whether it recovers remains to be seen. What we can suggest is that this collapse in labor force participation rates, together with a high level of unemployment, is an important part of the reason why, as Secretary Yellen reminded Congress, 1 in 10 homeowners is behind on their mortgages and 1 in 10 Americans is going to bed hungry. These numbers fall disproportionately on Black and other minorities relative to the white community. But, and this is an important note to remember, there are more white people who are unemployed, who are skipping meals, and who risk losing their homes than minorities who find themselves in a similar situation. And that is a politically important fact to keep in mind. And if you look at the movements of personal income at the state level, you get a sense of the implications of all of these labor force participation changes. Between the third and the fourth quarter of 2020, for example, personal income fell by 16% in Pennsylvania, 14% in Michigan, New Jersey, and New York, 13% in Illinois, and 11% in Georgia. It fell by 6.6% in California. Now, of course, the expectation is that the US economy is going to recover and that it's going to recover more quickly than we'll see in Europe. This may result in a short bump in headline inflation. The Philadelphia Federal Reserve produces a survey of professional forecasters that shows inflation rising to about 2.5% in the current quarter before falling back to a range between 2.1 and 2.2. That would last for the rest of the year. The 10-year forecast is pretty flat at that level as well. Chairman Powell said as much in his testimony. What's harder to anticipate is what the recovery will mean for income inequality, how that recovery will be perceived by the electorate, and what impact that recovery will have on the midterm elections that, believe it or not, are right around the corner given the structure of the US electoral calendar. We have about a year before the political parties start picking candidates and positioning themselves to hold or take control of the two roughly evenly balanced legislative chambers. I mention this because the more important stimulus measure that the Biden administration is planning is the $3 trillion package to build back better. That's an ambitious program. If it gets through, it'll have a major impact on US economic performance, but the politics surrounding that package are going to be very challenging to navigate and almost impossible if the midterm elections go badly for the Democrats. Thank you.